The winter wind roars across Aspen Creek, twisting through the snowbound valley where Navy SEAL Ethan Walker sought peace after years of war. But fate had other plans. When his German shepherd Rex leads him to a stranded nurse shivering beside the frozen tracks, a chance encounter becomes the beginning of a storm. Neither of them could escape. Together, Ethan and Clara must fight back against a ruthless syndicate, confront ghosts from Helmand, and cling to the one thing stronger than fear: faith. As bullets cut through the blizzard and the love blooms in the firelight, one soldier learns that sometimes God hides his greatest miracles in the people we're destined to save. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you still believe that even in the coldest nights, heaven sends a light, don't forget to subscribe. The wind rolled down from the Rockies, biting and clean, sweeping through the narrow streets of Aspen Creek, Colorado, until it reached the small train station, standing half buried in white. Inside the flickering light of a single lantern sat Clara Bennett, a 28-year-old nurse whose life had been reduced to one worn suitcase and a cracked leather medical bag. She had shoulder-length chestnut hair matted by melted snow, a soft, oval face now pale from cold, and eyes the color of gray dawn. Beautiful, but hollow, like windows that had forgotten warmth. The thin wool coat she wore was meant for autumn, not the brutal cold of a mountain winter. She pressed her gloved hands together, staring at the frost creeping up the wooden walls, trying to remember the sound of laughter that used to fill her life before everything turned to debt and fear. Just months ago, Clara had lived in Seattle, working in a small hospital where she cared for the forgotten and the poor. Her father, Henry Bennett, had once been a respected mechanic, broad-shouldered and warm-hearted, but addicted to risk. When his business collapsed, he borrowed money from men who wore gold rings and spoke softly while breaking bones. By the time he died, the debt had multiplied, and those men had turned their eyes toward her. Clara fled across state lines with what little she could carry, hoping to find refuge among strangers. But debts, like shadows, always find their way home. Outside, headlights cut through the falling snow. A battered pickup truck pulled into the station's empty lot. From it stepped a man who moved like he was used to the weight of danger. Ethan Walker, 35, had the kind of face that looked carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding him. Square jaw, a faint scar running from his left cheek to the edge of his beard, and eyes so sharp they seemed to measure everything in silence before speaking. He was dressed in a weathered military jacket and jeans tucked into snow boots, his breath rising in steady white clouds. At his side trotted Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with thick sable fur and intelligent amber eyes that scanned every shadow. Rex had once served with Ethan on missions overseas, trained to detect explosives, to protect, and to trust only one man. Now, both soldier and dog had returned home on leave, trying to remember what peace felt like. Ethan entered the station with the confidence of someone who had survived too much to fear a blizzard. The moment his gaze fell upon the trembling woman in the corner, something in him paused. The way she tried to make herself small, the way her shoulders shook with silent defiance, it reminded him of the refugees he'd seen in ruined towns, the ones who had lost everything, yet refused to break. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, carrying the rough cadence of years spent giving commands, but softened by concern. "You shouldn't be here alone. The next train's canceled. Storm's shutting everything down. Clara looked up, startled by the deep voice. I missed the earlier train. I can wait, she said, though her lips trembled too hard to form the words clearly. Ethan noticed the blue in her fingertips and the way she winced when she tried to flex her hands. He slipped off his gloves and crouched beside her, offering a thermos. Coffee, not great, but it'll keep you alive. Rex sat a few feet away, ears twitching, watching the woman with quiet curiosity. Clara hesitated, then took the thermos. The warmth spread through her palms like mercy. "You're military?" she said finally, noticing the faded seal emblem on his sleeve. "Used to be," he replied. "Just home for a while." His eyes flicked to her medical bag. "Nurse?" She nodded. "Yes, well, I was. Things got complicated." Ethan didn't push. He had the look of a man who understood that silence was sometimes the only safe language. Instead, he said, "There's a cabin up the road. Place I stay when I'm home. Warm, food simple but real. You'll freeze if you stay here." Pride made Clara hesitate. She had trusted kind words before, only to find a knife behind them. But the exhaustion in her bones whispered that she couldn't survive another night in the cold. Then Rex walked closer, pressing his head against her knee, tail wagging once. She looked into the dog's steady eyes and felt something she hadn't in months. Trust. "All right," she whispered, "just for the night." Ethan helped her to her feet. She was lighter than she looked, her movements unsteady. As they stepped into the storm, Rex trotted ahead, leaving perfect paw prints in the snow. The headlights of Ethan's truck cut through the darkness, revealing a world wrapped in silver and silence. For the first time since she fled Seattle, Clara felt the faintest flicker of safety. The drive to Ethan's cabin wound through narrow forest roads lined with pines heavy under fresh snow. Inside the truck, the heater hummed, and Rex rested his head on Clara's lap. Ethan drove with both hands firm on the wheel, eyes flicking between the road and the woman beside him. "Aspen Creek small," he said. "People look out for one another here. You'll be safe." Clara stared out the window, watching snowflakes blur past like ghosts. "Safe," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. "I used to believe in that." When they reached the cabin, a sturdy wooden house with smoke curling from the chimney, Ethan led her inside. The warmth of the fire seeped into her skin. The walls were decorated sparsely. A few photographs of mountain lakes, a folded flag in a glass case, and on a side table, a small framed picture of Ethan in uniform with two other men whose faces were crossed by the shadow of memory. He noticed her looking. "Teammates," he said quietly. "Didn't make it home." Clara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." "Yeah," he replied, stirring the fire. "Me too." Rex curled up by the hearth, sighing contentedly. Ethan handed Clara a blanket and a bowl of stew that smelled of rosemary and venison. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Her hands stopped trembling. For a while they sat in silence, the kind that felt heavy but not cruel. When the clock struck midnight, the storm outside had grown quieter. Clara stood by the window, watching the snow fall beneath the moonlight. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. Ethan looked up from where he was oiling an old hunting rifle. "It's quieter than most places. That's why I came back." But just as he said it, Rex lifted his head, ears twitching toward the distance. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ethan set the rifle down, listening. Faintly, through the wind, came the sound of another engine, an unfamiliar one, cutting through the stillness of the valley. He looked toward the dark tree line beyond the cabin. "No one drives out here this late," he said, standing slowly. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands tightened on the windowsill. "They found me," she whispered. Outside, 2 headlights stopped on the road below the hill. The sound of doors slamming echoed through the snow. Rex barked once, sharp, warning, ready. Ethan's jaw tightened. The peace he had been chasing all winter vanished into the cold. The headlights cut through the curtain of snow, stopping just beyond the tree line below Ethan's cabin. He could see 2 silhouettes moving through the swirling white, slow and deliberate, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Inside, the warmth of the fire suddenly felt like a fragile thing, something that could vanish at any second. Rex growled low, fur bristling along his back, every muscle coiled and ready. Ethan took the rifle from the mantel, his movements quiet, precise. "Stay behind me," he said. Clara obeyed without a word, her breath shallow. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the wind outside. Through the frosted window, Ethan watched the men approach. One was short and broad, his heavy coat flapping against the wind. The other, taller, leaner, with the stiff posture of someone who'd spent time in prison or the military. They reached the front steps. A fist pounded on the door. "Clara Bennett!" A voice barked, rough and confident. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Clara's face went pale. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "It's them," she whispered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to the door. "Who's asking?" he called. The shorter man laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. "Friends of your guest. Name's Ray Doyle. Maybe she forgot to mention her family business." The name hit Clara like ice. Ray Doyle had once worked for her father, a thick-necked enforcer with greasy blonde hair and a mouth full of yellow teeth. He was built like a bulldog, short, muscular, and always sweating, even in winter. His reputation in Seattle was simple. When debts went unpaid, he collected, often with broken bones as receipts. The taller man stayed silent, scanning the area. He was Mick Russo, mid-30s, long face, angular jaw, and cold blue eyes. The kind of man who looked like he'd been born angry. His left cheek bore a jagged scar, the mark of a knife fight long past. Where Ray's violence was loud, Mick's was patient. He never shouted. He didn't need to. People listened when death stood in front of them. Ethan opened the door halfway, rifle angled just low enough to be polite, but not harmless. "You're trespassing," he said calmly. "Turn around and get back in your truck." Ray grinned, showing gold caps on his molars. "You hiding her, soldier boy? That's a bad idea. She owes people serious money." Ethan's tone didn't change. "This isn't Seattle. You don't get to come into Aspen Creek and threaten folks." Mick finally spoke, his voice smooth and chilling. "We don't want trouble. We just want the lady to come with us, talk things through." Clara stepped out from behind Ethan before he could stop her. Her voice shook, but her words didn't. "There's nothing to talk about. My father borrowed the money, not me. You got what you wanted when he died." Ray's smile vanished. "Not quite. See, sweetheart, debt doesn't die with the dead. You're his only blood. That makes you collateral." He reached into his coat, but before he could pull whatever waited inside, Rex barked, lunging forward. Ethan swung the rifle up fast, and in that split second of tension, something changed. The headlights behind the men flickered off, and a second car door slammed. "Enough!" A new voice cut through the wind. From the darkness stepped Sheriff Samuel Reed, a tall man in his early 50s with silver hair, a lined face, and the kind of authority that didn't need shouting. He wore a thick brown duster, a badge glinting beneath the snowflakes, and his right hand rested lightly on the grip of his sidearm. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. "You're about 10 miles out of your jurisdiction." Ray tried to bluster. "Just collecting what's owed, Sheriff. Private business." "Not any more," Reed replied. "This is my county. You so much as blink wrong, and I'll have you cooling your heels in a cell till spring thaw." The two men exchanged glances. Mick shrugged, a quiet signal of retreat. Ray spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he growled. Ethan stepped forward. "You're right. It's not. You come near her again, you'll wish it was." They left without another word, their truck fish-tailing down the icy road until its tail lights vanished into the dark. Sheriff Reed holstered his weapon and turned to Ethan. "Didn't expect trouble this far up the ridge," he said. His tone was measured, but his eyes were sharp. "You always bring company that dangerous, Walker?" Ethan shook his head. "She's running from something that found her." Reed studied Clara, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Bennett, Aspen Creek's small. We take care of our own. I'll send a deputy to keep an eye on the road for a few nights." Clara's gratitude came out as a whisper. "Thank you, Sheriff." Reed nodded. "Don't thank me yet. Men like that don't give up easy." When the sheriff's truck disappeared down the slope, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire inside. Ethan closed the door and bolted it. Clara sat on the couch, hands trembling. "I thought I could outrun it," she murmured. "I thought if I just disappeared." Ethan sat opposite her. "You can't outrun ghosts, Clara. You face them." Her eyes met his. "Even if they kill you." He leaned forward. "Especially then." Rex nudged her knee, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt something close to courage. The next morning, Aspen Creek looked reborn under the pale light of dawn. Snow sparkled on rooftops, smoke rose from chimneys, and the world seemed too peaceful to hold last night's danger. But Ethan didn't believe in peace that lasted. He stood outside, clearing the path to the woods, his breath a steady rhythm in the cold air. That's when he noticed it. New footprints, half buried in snow, leading away from the cabin and circling back from the opposite direction. Too many to belong to the two men who had left. Someone else had been watching. Ethan crouched, studying the prints, larger, heavier boots, 3 sets, maybe 4. They led toward the tree line and vanished into the pines. He called softly, "Rex." The dog trotted over, nose close to the snow, tail stiff. After a few seconds, Rex whined and looked toward the woods, alert and uneasy. Ethan straightened, scanning the ridge. The morning light caught on something metallic near the tree line, a glint, like a reflection from a scope. His pulse quickened. "Inside," he whispered. Clara was already at the door, sensing the shift in his tone. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan chambered a round in his rifle without looking at her. Trouble didn't leave Clara. It multiplied. The morning sun had barely broken through the fog when Ethan Walker crouched beside the line of boot prints. The snow was shallow but undisturbed, and that made the evidence stand out sharply. 5 distinct sets, not 2. Whoever had been watching the cabin had come prepared. He traced a gloved hand over the frozen imprints, noticing the shape of the soles. Military-grade treads, not random wanderers. Whoever they were, they knew how to move quietly. Rex sniffed along the trail, tail rigid, his breath steaming in the cold. The dog stopped suddenly and gave a low whine, glancing back at Ethan as if to say, they were close, too close. Ethan rose slowly, scanning the ridge. The woods beyond were still, too still. His instincts, honed by years of ambushes and recon missions, whispered that this was the calm before a storm. He turned to the cabin where Clara watched from the window, her pale face framed by the frost-edged glass. She tried to appear brave, but her eyes betrayed fear. Ethan gave a small nod to reassure her, and then followed the tracks toward the slope, Rex pacing beside him. Half a mile down the trail, the snow deepened. That was where he found the first sign of panic, a cigarette butt half buried, still faintly warm. Someone had been here less than an hour ago. He scanned the area, noting the faint glimmer of metal wedged into a tree trunk, a bullet casing. It wasn't fresh, but it was recent enough. Whoever these men were, they were armed and waiting. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was pacing near the fire. She had changed into a wool sweater Ethan had found for her, sleeves rolled up, hands trembling. "Are they gone?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, they're circling." She sank into the chair, covering her face. "I've ruined your peace." Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Peace is overrated." That afternoon, Sheriff Reed arrived again, his old pickup truck creaking under the weight of snow chains. He looked tired, as though he hadn't slept. He stepped out, brushing frost from his gray hair. "Walker," he said, "we found their vehicle about 2 miles down the road, abandoned. 2 men, probably more on foot. Locals saw them heading toward the north woods." He paused, his gaze flicking toward Clara. "You weren't lying. Someone wants her bad." Reed wasn't alone this time. With him came Deputy Sarah Collins, a young woman in her early 30s, tall and athletic, with sandy hair tied into a neat braid under her hat. Her uniform was immaculate, her badge polished. But there was steel behind her blue eyes, a survivor's gaze. She had grown up in Aspen Creek, the daughter of a lumberjack who died in an avalanche when she was 16. Since then, she had learned to carry herself like someone who wouldn't break easily. "We'll keep watch from town," Sarah said, her voice crisp but calm. "But if they're professionals, they won't attack in daylight." Clara offered a faint smile. "That doesn't make me feel better." Sarah's expression softened. "Wasn't meant to. It's just the truth." Ethan admired the deputy's bluntness. Reed turned back to him. "You know these woods better than anyone. If they try to flank the cabin, we'll need warning." Ethan nodded. "I'll take Rex out tonight. Keep eyes on the ridge." Reed's brow furrowed. "Don't play hero, Walker. Not anymore." Ethan didn't respond. As night fell, the storm returned. Thin flakes at first, then a steady curtain of white. The wind howled through the pines like a warning from the mountain itself. Ethan pulled on his heavy coat and slung the rifle over his shoulder. Rex waited at the door, silent but alert. Clara stepped forward, her face pale in the firelight. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You already saved me once." Ethan gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't about saving you. It's about making sure we both see morning." He and Rex moved out into the storm. The snow muffled everything, the crunch of boots, the whisper of trees. They followed the edge of the ridge, moving like shadows. After 20 minutes, Rex froze, ears pricked forward. Ethan dropped to one knee, scanning through the night vision scope. Between the pines, faint movement, a flicker of shape, the glint of steel. He adjusted the scope and saw them. 3 men crouched near the stream bed, rifles slung, whispering to each other. He caught snippets of their words. Doyle says wait till dawn. What about the soldier? He won't be a problem. Ethan's pulse tightened. He recognized the posture, the discipline. These weren't just debt collectors anymore. These were ex-contractors, mercenaries, maybe hired by Doyle himself. They moved like men who'd done this before. He and Rex stayed low, circling behind the rocks until he could hear the crunch of their boots clear as breath. Then a twig snapped beneath his boot. One of the men turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. "Who's there?" Ethan didn't answer. He slipped back behind a tree, steadying his breath. Rex was motionless beside him, a statue of muscle and intent. The beam swept past, close enough to blind him for a moment. The man cursed. Probably an animal. But then another voice replied, older, deeper. That wasn't an animal. Spread out. In that instant, the night exploded into motion. A flare ignited somewhere near the ridge, casting a red glow across the snow. The men shouted, spreading apart. Ethan raised his rifle, but hesitated. He couldn't risk drawing fire toward the cabin. He had to move them away. "Rex, heel!" he whispered, and the dog pressed close to his leg. Together, they slipped down the ravine toward the stream. Behind him, gunfire cracked, short, controlled bursts. Someone was shooting into the woods not to kill, but to flush him out. He ducked behind a fallen tree, snow spraying into his face. Then from the distance came another engine. Headlights cut through the darkness, bouncing up the trail. He caught a glimpse of a figure leaning out the window of a pickup, firing warning shots into the air. Sheriff Reed. The mercenaries scattered, fading into the trees like ghosts. Ethan exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. When he returned to the cabin, Reed's truck was parked outside, lights still on. Clara ran out barefoot into the snow before he could even reach the steps. "You're bleeding," she said, touching his arm. A shallow graze, nothing more, but her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "It's fine," he said. "They're trained. This wasn't about collecting money anymore. Someone wants to make a point." Reed climbed out of his truck, snow in his beard. "I'll have the state troopers up here by morning," he said. "But I don't like this, Walker. Doyle doesn't have the brains for this kind of operation. Somebody else is pulling the strings." Ethan stared into the woods, where the flare's dying light still glowed faintly through the pines. "Then we find out who," he said. Rex gave a low growl, staring at the same spot. In the faint light, Ethan saw it too, a shape pinned to a tree trunk. He walked forward cautiously and found it, a single envelope, wet from snow, nailed with a hunting knife. On its surface, written in smudged red ink, were 3 words, "Debt paid back." He felt the cold tighten in his chest. It wasn't a threat, it was a message, one meant for him. By dawn, the snow had stopped falling, but the world outside still looked bruised and heavy. The envelope remained nailed to the pine, its crimson ink frozen in the cold air. Ethan Walker stood over it with his jaw clenched, his breath forming small ghosts that vanished before they reached the ground. Rex sat beside him, tail still, his fur frosted white. Clara watched from the porch, wrapped in Ethan's thick coat, her eyes wide with unease. She didn't need to read the words again to feel their weight. Debt paid back. It wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. Sheriff Reed arrived within the hour, his truck rumbling up the icy path, headlights cutting across the pale morning. Beside him was Deputy Sarah Collins, her face drawn tight with lack of sleep. Reed examined the envelope without touching it. "No prints," he said after a moment. "These bastards know what they're doing." Sarah crouched beside the tree, her gloved fingers tracing the mark where the knife had been driven in. "Military issue," she murmured. "Standard Navy combat blade. Same kind used by SEALs." Her gaze lifted toward Ethan, who stared back evenly. "Could be coincidence," he said, but they both knew better. Clara stepped closer. "Why would they write that? Who's paying what back?" Reed sighed, pulling his coat tighter. "That's the question. Maybe it's not about money anymore. Maybe it's personal." Ethan turned toward the cabin, his expression unreadable. "If they wanted me dead, they had the chance last night. This is psychological. They're trying to push us into making a mistake." By noon, the investigation had spread down into town. Ethan drove into Aspen Creek with Reed to meet the local intelligence contact Reed often relied on, Jonas Merrick, a retired federal marshal who now ran the general store on Main Street. Jonas was in his 60s, a tall, weathered man with a gray beard trimmed close to his jaw and eyes that seemed to read too much. Years ago, he'd lost his son in an unsolved bank robbery near Denver, and since then he turned his bitterness into purpose, gathering information, keeping tabs on anyone dangerous who crossed into his county. When Ethan entered, Jonas nodded slowly. "Heard you stirred up some snow ghosts," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Sheriff filled me in. You've got ex-contractors moving like shadows in my backyard." Ethan leaned on the counter. "I need names." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "Names cost favors." Ethan met his stare. "I'll owe you one." Jonas smirked. "That's what worries me." After a pause, he slid a small folder across the counter. Inside were 3 grainy photos printed from security footage, men loading crates into a truck outside a warehouse in Billings, Montana. "That's your crew. Ex-military, part of a private outfit called Rogue Meridian. Disbanded 2 years ago after a failed op overseas. Word is they started taking freelance jobs. One name keeps coming up, Darius Cole." Ethan froze at the name. "Cole," he repeated quietly. Jonas nodded. "Yeah, ring a bell?" Ethan's hand tightened around the folder. "He was in my unit once." Clara, who had come along for safety, looked up sharply. "You know him?" Ethan's jaw flexed. "I thought he was dead." Jonas frowned. "If he's alive, he's running the crew that's after you, and if he wrote that message, then debt paid back wasn't for you. It was from him." That night the storm returned. The wind moaned across the roof like a restless spirit. Ethan sat by the fire, the folder open on his knees, staring at the photo of Darius Cole. In it, Darius was as Ethan remembered, tall, lean, eyes too cold for their age. They'd fought together years ago in Helmand Province, brothers in everything but blood. Darius had saved Ethan's life once, dragging him out of a collapsed building under fire. But later, a mission went wrong. A civilian convoy was caught in crossfire. Darius defied orders, tried to cover their retreat, and half his team died. He blamed Ethan for not backing him up. After that, Darius vanished, presumed KIA. Now he was back. Clara sat across from him, sewing a tear in Rex's harness, her hands steady even as her voice trembled. "You think this Darius blames you?" Ethan didn't look up. "He doesn't blame me. He hates me." She hesitated. "Then what will he do next?" He looked toward the window where snowflakes danced in the firelight. "He'll come for what he thinks I owe him. As night deepened, Sarah called from town. The line crackled with static. "Ethan, you need to hear this. One of my patrols found a burned-out pickup near the canyon pass. 3 bodies inside. Same boots, same weapons you described." "Dead?" Ethan asked. "Very," she replied. "But there's something else. The fire was set after they were shot. Execution style. Someone cleaned house." Ethan's stomach turned cold. "Then Darius isn't just after me. He's removing loose ends." Clara covered her mouth, horrified. "He's killing his own men?" "That's what makes him dangerous," Ethan said. "He's not working for money. This is a vendetta." Later, when the cabin had gone quiet, Ethan stood outside under the fractured moonlight, watching his breath rise and fade. Rex padded beside him, head low, scanning the woods. A shape moved on the ridge, faint, then gone. But Ethan didn't need to see it clearly. He felt it, the way predators sense each other across distance. Somewhere out there, Darius was watching, waiting for the right moment. Rex gave a soft growl, tail stiff. Ethan turned just as a small object landed in the snow by his boot, a folded note wrapped in black thread. He crouched, unwrapping it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Darius's. The message was short, written in clean ink that gleamed under the moon. "You saved 1 life. Now you owe me 3. Ethan looked up toward the ridge. The wind howled, carrying only silence. But for the first time, he knew exactly what Darius wanted, and that it would not end until one of them was gone. The storm broke at dawn, leaving a brittle silence that wrapped around Aspen Creek like glass. The pine trees glistened under a hard frost, and smoke from Ethan Walker's cabin rose straight into the pale sky. Inside, the fire burned low, its glow flickering across the faces of 3 exhausted people and 1 watchful dog. The letter Darius had sent, those 7 words written in calm, deliberate ink, sat on the table between them like a ticking clock. Ethan hadn't slept. His eyes were rimmed with red, and a day's growth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He'd been staring at the letter for hours, every word a memory. Darius Cole wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a mirror Ethan didn't want to look into. They'd both seen too much, done too much. But where Ethan had pulled back from the edge, Darius had stepped off it willingly. Sheriff Samuel Reed stood near the window, scanning the tree line through binoculars. The old lawman's face was drawn, his silver hair damp with snow. He had seen plenty in his years, but never a situation like this. Small-town peace shattered by the private war of 2 soldiers. "You're saying this Darius was your brother-in-arms?" he asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "He saved my life once. I left him behind after Helmand. He never forgave me." Deputy Sarah Collins sat on the arm of a chair, jotting notes in her worn leather pad. "Helmand, that's Afghanistan, right?" she asked. Ethan's voice was flat. "A lifetime ago." Clara Bennett, sitting closest to the fire, looked from one face to another, trying to understand how the man she'd trusted for protection could have carried such darkness inside him. Her fingers toyed with the silver chain at her neck. "What happened there?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, the air in the cabin growing heavier. "We were sent to retrieve a missing convoy. Intel was bad. Civilians got caught in the crossfire. Darius disobeyed orders to pull them out. Half our team died. Command blamed him. He blamed me." Sheriff Reed exhaled slowly. "So this isn't just about money or revenge. It's about guilt." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No, it's about a man who can't let go." That afternoon, Reed ordered a security sweep of the area. Sarah led 2 deputies and a K-9 unit up the ridge, while Ethan and Rex scouted the old logging trail that wound behind the cabin. The forest there was dense, draped in snow so thick it muffled every sound. Rex moved ahead, nose low, occasionally glancing back for approval. They found tire tracks frozen into the mud, fresh, heavy, and leading toward the canyon pass. Halfway along the trail, they came across a small hunting shack. The door hung open, creaking. Ethan raised his rifle, motioning Rex to stay. Inside, the air smelled of oil and damp canvas. The place had been used recently. On the table lay a map of Aspen Creek, with several spots circled in red, his cabin among them. There was also a photo, folded neatly, showing Darius and Ethan in uniform, younger, smiling. Across the bottom, written in black ink, were the words, "Helmand was only the beginning." Before Ethan could react, Rex barked sharply, facing the trees. A shadow moved, then gunfire erupted. Splinters flew from the wall as bullets tore through the cabin. Ethan ducked, returning fire with controlled precision. Rex bolted behind cover, barking furiously. The shot stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. Then silence. Whoever had attacked had melted back into the woods. Back at the main cabin, Ethan explained what had happened. Reed frowned deeply. "He's toying with you," the sheriff said. "Wants you off balance." Sarah checked the bullet casings they'd recovered. Same caliber as the mercenaries' weapons, but the angles, these were warning shots. Clara looked frightened. "He could have killed you?" Ethan nodded grimly. "He doesn't want me dead yet." As night fell, Clara cooked stew while Rex lay near her feet, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air. The dog seemed restless, uneasy. Sarah sat by the fire, cleaning her service pistol, while Reed pored over the map they'd taken from the shack. "He's watching the valley," the sheriff muttered. "Every route in or out. He's not after the girl anymore. He's after you." Ethan stared into the flames. "If he's here for me, then I end it. Tonight." Clara turned sharply. "No, you're not going after him alone?" Her voice trembled, but there was a fierce edge beneath the fear. "You think fighting him will fix what happened before? You can't save your past by dying for it?" Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment the soldier inside him faltered. Before he could answer, headlights flared outside, cutting through the snow. Reed stood, hand on his holster. Sarah peered through the curtain. "That's Jonas Merrick's truck," she said. Moments later, the old man himself stumbled through the door, his beard dusted with ice. "You won't believe what I found," he panted, holding up a flash drive wrapped in duct tape. "Got it from one of my old contacts at the Billings Yard. They kept copies of shipping manifests from Rogue Meridian's last contract. Guess whose name was on the payment file?" Ethan frowned. "Darius?" Jonas shook his head slowly. "No, a shell company called Hathaway Logistics out of Seattle." Clara froze. "Seattle? That's where my father's business loans came from." Jonas nodded. "Exactly. Same signature on both accounts. Whoever's paying Darius used your father's old debts as cover money." The room fell silent. The puzzle finally made sense. Clara's father hadn't just owed money to gangsters. He'd been used as a front in something far larger. Darius wasn't just settling a score. He was cleaning up a trail. "So, whoever runs Hathaway Logistics wanted your father's debts erased," Sarah said. "They hired Darius to do it, and to make sure nobody could connect the dots." Reed rubbed his temples. "Which means This isn't just about Ethan's past anymore. It's about whatever your father stumbled into before he died. Outside, Rex growled, low and steady. Ethan went to the window, scanning the trees. Snow drifted under the pale moonlight, and for a moment he saw nothing. Then, at the edge of the woods, a flare ignited. Bright, red, blinding, it painted the valley in color like blood. Reed shouted, "Everyone down!" as the explosion tore through the night, shattering the cabin windows. The blast knocked Clara off her feet, the world erupting in heat and smoke. Rex barked wildly, dragging her away from the collapsing beam. Through the haze, Ethan saw figures moving against the flames, dark shapes advancing from the ridge, and in front of them, walking calmly through the firelight, was Darius Cole himself, his face illuminated in the red glow, eyes fixed on Ethan like the ghost he'd summoned back from hell. The explosion left the night howling with chaos. The cabin was half gone, the roof torn open, snow and smoke swirling together into a gray storm. Ethan Walker lay on the ground, his ears ringing, the world around him tilting in and out of focus. The acrid scent of gunpowder mixed with the sweet burn of pine. Rex was the first to move, limping slightly, shaking off ash and crawling toward Clara Bennett, who was coughing near the hearth. The dog pressed his nose to her hand and whined until she stirred. Through the haze of debris a figure advanced. Darius Cole. His black tactical coat was burned at the edges, and his face bore a scar Ethan didn't remember, slicing across his cheek like a reminder of something cruelly unfinished. His eyes were glacial gray, focused and unblinking. Behind him, 3 mercenaries fanned out, armed, silent, moving like a well-oiled machine. Darius raised a hand, and they stopped. "You should have stayed buried, Ethan," he said, his voice calm, too calm for the destruction around them. Ethan stood slowly, rifle in hand, blood streaking his temple. "And let you burn down innocent people again?" he shot back. Darius's smile was thin, humorless. "Innocent? You sound like the officer who ordered us to stand down in Helmand while civilians died screaming. You followed orders. I buried brothers." Sheriff Reed stumbled from behind the wreckage, pistol drawn, coat torn, his face streaked with soot. "Drop your weapons," he barked, but Darius only tilted his head. "You've got courage, old man. That'll get you killed first." Sarah Collins appeared beside Reed, limping, her braid matted with ash, eyes fierce despite a cut across her brow. She fired a warning shot that grazed one of the mercenaries' shoulders, sending him to the ground. The others scattered, taking cover behind the wreckage. Gunfire split the air. Ethan shouted for Clara to get down, dragging her behind the remnants of a wall. Rex growled, his fur bristling. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, but Clara grabbed his sleeve. "You can't fight him alone." Ethan looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "I'm not fighting him for me." He darted out from cover, rolling through the snow and firing. One mercenary fell. Darius moved like a shadow, returning fire with deadly precision, bullets kicking up bursts of ice inches from Ethan's boots. Reed provided cover, but a ricochet clipped his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. Sarah crawled toward him, gritting her teeth, and applied pressure to the wound while firing back one-handed. "We need backup," she shouted. But there was no answer. The storm had swallowed the radio signals whole. Ethan ducked behind a fallen beam, breathing hard. His mind flashed back to Helmand. The roar of gunfire, the smoke, the civilians screaming. Darius had dragged him out then. Now he was dragging them both into hell again. "Why, Darius?" Ethan called out. Why involve her? She had nothing to do with this. From the smoke, Darius's voice came, low and steady. Because she's the debt, Ethan. Her father was the one who sold out our operation. Hathaway Logistics was his pipeline. The intel leak that killed our men, it started with him, and you covered it up. Ethan froze. The words hit him harder than the blast had. You're lying, he said, but Darius's laugh was hollow. You always were a good liar. Clara had overheard. Her face went pale. My father betrayed your unit? Her voice trembled. Ethan turned to her, desperation breaking through the soldier's mask. Clara, listen to me. Your father didn't know who he was helping. He was being used. He tried to warn us, but the transmission never made it. Then why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because I didn't want you to live with his ghosts, Ethan said quietly. Darius stepped from the smoke, rifle raised. Then maybe you should live with yours. He fired, but Rex lunged, intercepting the shot. The dog yelped and fell, blood staining the snow crimson. Ethan's world went red. He roared and charged, slamming into Darius. The rifle flew from Darius's hands, both men tumbling into the snow, fists and fury colliding. They fought like two sides of the same storm. Ethan, driven by guilt, Darius by vengeance. The wind howled around them, echoing their grunts. Their rage, Darius struck hard, cutting Ethan's lip. You left me to die, he snarled. Ethan hit back, blood spraying. I tried to save you. For a heartbeat, the fight paused, both men breathing hard, their faces inches apart, steam rising between them. You think you're the hero, Darius hissed, but heroes don't leave bodies behind. Ethan saw the madness in his old friend's eyes, the kind of madness that had been born on battlefields and fed by betrayal. You're right, he said. Heroes don't, but survivors do. With one motion, Ethan drove his knife into Darius's side, just beneath the ribs. Darius gasped, shock flickering in his cold eyes. He staggered, staring at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. Helmand, all over again, he whispered, then collapsed backward into the snow. The gunfire ceased. The remaining mercenaries fled into the woods, their leader gone. The night was silent again, except for the wind and the faint whimper of Rex. Clara ran to the dog, cradling his head, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. He's still breathing, she said. Ethan knelt beside them, pressing a hand to Rex's chest. Hang on, buddy. You've earned more than this. Sheriff Reed staggered over, arm bleeding but still steady. Ambulance is on its way. You did it, Walker. Ethan shook his head, staring down at Darius's still form. No, I just finished what should have ended years ago. Hours later, as dawn bled gold across the mountains, the cabin was nothing but ash and smoke. Rex, patched up and bandaged, lay asleep beside Clara on a makeshift cot. Sarah sat nearby, nursing her wounds and sipping coffee from a dented thermos. Reed stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the ruins. Hell of a night, he murmured. Ethan stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots. The valley stretched before him, quiet now, untouched by fire or war. He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, but steady. The ghosts of Helmand had finally stopped whispering. Clara appeared behind him, a blanket around her shoulders. You're leaving, aren't you? She said. Ethan smiled faintly. Orders came through this morning. They want me back on duty. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Then go. I'll be here when you get back. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You've got a stubborn heart, Clara Bennett. And you've got a home to come back to, Ethan Walker. Rex barked softly from the porch, tail wagging despite his bandages. Ethan laughed, the sound quiet but real. He kissed Clara once, then turned toward the road that wound down the mountain, his figure shrinking against the endless white. Behind him, Clara stood in the doorway, watching until he vanished into the light. The snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving, covering the blood and ash, burying the past beneath a new beginning. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder or fire from the heavens. They arrive quietly, like a soldier returning home, or a wounded dog finding the strength to stand again. In the silence after the storm, when the snow begins to fall and the world feels clean once more, that's where God whispers the loudest. He whispers through the loyalty of a German shepherd who shields his master from death. He speaks through the forgiveness in a woman's heart, even after truth shatters her world. And he moves through a man who has carried guilt across continents, only to find redemption not in victory, but in love. Because faith isn't about never falling. It's about rising again when the night feels longest. Ethan didn't just survive that night in Aspen Creek. He rediscovered what God had been trying to show him all along, that even broken hearts can be used to heal others, and that no wound is beyond his reach. If you've ever felt lost, betrayed, or too tired to keep fighting, remember this story. Somewhere out there, your Rex is still waiting, your Clara is still believing, and your miracle is already on its way. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your story, or the miracle you're praying for tonight.